The New Garden is a podcast on technological power, promise, and peril. Technology is no longer just a set of tools. It's a force that shapes our desires, our communities, and even our theology. The New Garden explores what it means to live faithfully at a time when humanity can rewrite genomes, simulate consciousness, and manufacture joy with the push of a button. Drawing from Christian tradition and moral imagination, the podcast confronts the tension between what is possible and what might undo us. Each episode is a guided reflection on our age of godlike power, an invitation to discern how we cultivate this new garden without becoming the serpent in it.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the New Garden Podcast. Today's guest is in our backyard in Atlanta. It is Dr. Joe Sutherland of Emory's Center for AI Learning. Joe can go deep on so many topics as it relates to our civic and our faith life and this AI moment in which we find ourselves, what it means for how we live, our political moment, our democratic institutions, and we just had a great time exploring this with us. We thank you for Joe and what Emory is doing in this space to educate us from a humanities perspective. And without further ado, enjoy this episode of the New Garden Podcast. Thank you. Joe, thank you very much for joining us on the New Garden Podcast.
My pleasure, Brent. And Tony, thanks for having me.
Let's start with the Emory Center for AI Learning. If you could tell us a little bit about what you all are up to, what is your remit, what does success look like?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, the AI Center, it's grown to be pretty significant over the past few years. It's a 9-figure initiative now. It's an innovation portfolio across Emory Healthcare and Emory University. Comprises new tuition generating programs. We want to make sure that our students are learning how to use artificial intelligence as the best tool possible so they're competitive on the job market, but also so they can be leaders. A lot of people ask, why didn't you just go to Georgia Tech and do this initiative? Which I think is funny. It's not exactly how it works. But when you go to Georgia Tech and you're going to go, I got lots of colleagues over there. You're going to work on the hardest engineering problems, right? So like, how do you build a bigger, better language model? What's the next ChatGPT? I think those are important questions. And at Emory, we do our share of large language model coding, et cetera. But I really think that the opportunity for us with our excellence across 9 different schools, the healthcare system, focuses in not only arts and sciences, but joint partnerships with Georgia Tech and biomedical engineering, et cetera. Like, we have the opportunity to look at solving the world's hardest problems with the best tools that we've ever created. And so that's really the focus of the AI Center at Emory, is thinking about how to bring up students in that tradition, how to do research and get grants in that tradition, public-private partnerships that help us actually benefit the public more broadly, and not just through research and scholarship, but also workforce development. And then when it comes to the healthcare system, we support activities such as, how do you do all this within a HIPAA-compliant environment? There's big questions ethically. How do you think about these data being transferred, and how do you think about the people that it impacts, and how do you train models that really are going to do the same work for everyone? And I can go into depth on any of those things, but if we're going to use healthcare AI, we've got to make sure it works the same for everyone, not just for some people. So lots of questions that we're interested in.
Sure. And obviously from this podcast, we're coming at this from a theological angle, but also a practical angle of what is the world that we want to live in, and what does the kingdom look like, and how do the technological innovations impact the way we live and the way we interface with one another in community. And I think it's easy when you spend your time doing a podcast on this and reading the news and AI is the center of the hype cycle to think, oh, this is kind of top of mind for everybody. But obviously you have had a purview across Georgia talking to people about AI, their hopes and fears of this moment. Like, what are you seeing in the true public zeitgeist? And what's top of mind for people when you're having conversations with real, normal Georgians about how they see this AI moment?
Yeah, I think there's a palpable fear. We went on a statewide tour funded by joint partnership between Rowan Foundation. If you or your listeners are not familiar with Rowan Foundation, it's an excellent initiative. It's been capitalized by a lot of the research institutions around the state and some other philanthropy partners. It's run by Mason Alstock, I think, is a phenomenal leader for the initiative. It's like this 50-year view. It's like, if we were able to invest in Georgia's technology development infrastructure, in our ability to think about agriculture from the futuristic perspective, the environment, workforce, et cetera, what would that really look like if we were to build, for example, like a Research Triangle Park that's next to Atlanta? How would we do that? Biotech would be a big part of that. And so those are the questions they're trying to answer. And I think it's a really important initiative for long-term innovation and momentum in the state. They wanted to sponsor this tour because, when I went to do a talk down in Newton County, y'all been to Newton before?
No,
You been to Covington?
for cross country.
Okay. So you're familiar with the area. The I-20 traffic is like terrible. And, when I went down to the Chamber of Commerce for Newton County and I asked that room, it was a pretty big room, it's maybe 50 people. And business leaders in the area. And I said, how many of you guys are familiar with AI or using it in your work today? And I got like one hand that went up. And it's like, that's when it hit me. This is maybe 2 years ago, by the way.
Yeah.
And it hit me like, oh, wow. We're all talking about AI. It's all in the news, just like as Brent said. But it's not everybody's getting access at the same time. And so how do we make sure everyone gets access at the same time? So anywho, we ended up spinning up this statewide tour. Georgia Chamber of Commerce also helped us out. We visited 23 different communities around the state. Every pocket, ITP, OTP, rural Georgia, we were like, we were in Albany, I can't even, actually my cousin lives down in Albany. So I was like, it was kind of a little bit twofer. I got to see him and his wife and his new kids and also get to speak about AI, which was fun. The main piece after speaking to probably about 10,000 people around the state is people are worried about what it means for them. People are worried about what it means for their kids. People are worried about what it means for critical thinking skills. That was a really interesting one. People are generally worried that, it's going to somehow be bad for us. Mm-hmm. And the sense I get is that because I do these talks, and then afterwards people walk out, and they say, "Oh wow, it's actually not as bad as I thought." So I think it's almost a literacy problem in some ways.
Yeah. Joe, some of the fear that you are picking up, I want to just dig a little bit deeper on the fear piece. Is it fear of like replacement of, sort of workforce replacement, fear that they're going to be left behind even more, like certain generations who already feel left behind by like QR codes and the internet? Like, do they feel like they're going to be left behind more, or is there a fear of like they just don't have not just the knowledge but like basic competency to navigate the emerging technological landscape?
It's kind of all of the above. And it doesn't specialize in one segment of the population. It's like across all income levels, class levels, ethnic backgrounds. It really is like, largely shared. And what I noticed is, for example, I did one talk, and as part of it, I'm talking about some of the artificial intelligence technologies we use and are developing at Emory Healthcare to do diagnostic exams using AI. Just 4 cents later, you can get a potential diagnosis, or at least recommendation to a physician about whether or not there's something to look at. And I had a radiologist stand up in that talk, physician, and he was so afraid of it taking his job, he got upset. He said, "There's no way these computers could ever be as good as us," and he just walked out of the talk. Right. So that's
Wow.
one example of somebody highly qualified, highly educated, very upset. And I wish he had stayed, because turns out that actually I believe this is going to improve the radiological diagnostics market significantly for a number of reasons. I mean, and I can go into those, but I think people get worried, then they close down. You look at some folks. This is one of the weirdest generational gaps I've seen. Like I had like kind of some parent, you ever go with your kid to a talk and you're like get up, go talk to the speaker. This is going to be good for you. So like I had a mom who was like get up, and the kid was like, okay, let me ask you the question. It's like, what type of job should I have in the future? And I realized like the narrative right now is like, oh, it's going to replace your job. You need to get an AI job, I don't even know what that means, to be honest. Like, It's a new type of software that helps enhance any job that you would already normally get. And actually, the power is going to be knowing how to use it and understanding the biases that it might have. And by the way, AI is not just ChatGPT large language models. It's a huge field we can get
Yeah,
into.
yeah.
So,
Say, Joe, say
yeah.
more about that, because I do think like one of the things that, as Brent and I have launched this podcast and we've built an audience and have started talking more and more offline too with people, like there is um, this sort of bias that AI is all about LLMs and ChatGPT. Talk more, like, for our audience who may be entering this conversation with, like, what are other forms of AI, especially because you're working in such diverse sectors within Emory. Like, could you just share a little bit about your own experiences? And you have this great way of bringing it down to, lay people's level. Maybe just share a little bit with our audience about these other technologies that aren't LLMs.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And AI is a big field. The way that we academically think about artificial intelligence and have for a while is that you've got these technologies that are called machine learning technologies. Those are largely basically tools that help make predictions about things based on data they've observed before, given some sort of posited model about how the world sort of is supposed to work. When you think about a human, like one of the biggest decisions you'd ever make in your life is like going and buying a house. And you're making all these predictions, right? You're like, I want to live in a place with a good school. Is my kid going to go to that school? Is my kid going to need a special learning program? Is it a different school, private school, public school? How's it all going to work? Can I afford that? Am I going to make enough in 10 years to still pay this mortgage? Are my taxes going to go? You're making predictions all the time. And what machine learning models do is they're really good at making a spectrum of predictions based on lots of different situations that, different data that might enter your reasoning process, given all the other people out there. And so if you say, look, I'm just like everybody else, I'm in this segment, I look like, I've got this level of income, I've got, this level of educational background. What's the spectrum of opportunities look like, and the spectrum of sort of like potential constraints? And then how do I see all the options? Artificial intelligence comes in academically when you are trying to now delegate the decision-making authority over all those predictions that are made to a machine. So normally, as a human, I make all these predictions in my head. One of my favorite quotes is, "We evolve so our thoughts can die for us." That's actually one of my favorite quotes right now. All those predictions happen. You're like, oh, we don't want to do those. Those are death, right? But this is good. Let me decide to go with this. That's my judgment being applied. When you delegate judgment to a machine, that's what makes it artificial intelligence. Now, the funny thing is, you look at what people think AI is today, which, by the way, was not what people thought AI was 10 years ago, which had a different definition than 20 years ago, which, you can go all the way back. I mean, I can even show you how some of the basic mathematics to create language models were created in the 1450s by Catholic monks, by the way. We should talk about that. That's a really interesting factoid.
Season two.
That'll be season 2. But
Go there. We got nothing but time.
we got time. We'll get there. So let's see where we go. But if you were to think about AI today, most people think it's ChatGPT. And the funny thing is, a large language model still does not have the authority, in most cases, delegated to it to make decisions on your behalf. And so academically, we wouldn't even consider it artificial intelligence. We'd consider it a form of deep learning, which is a flavor of machine learning.
Right.
And Joe, you mentioned that people often come to your talks with a host of fears, and then you wished the one radiologist hadn't left, because oftentimes they leave with some of those fears ameliorated. Can you talk about those fears specifically? What of those resonate with you? And then, what specifically, again, do you say, oh, this is a common fear I hear that I do not hold, and here's why?
I'd say I've gone through emotional journeys on this. Like, one of the ones I heard a lot was, how are we going to teach our kids how to do critical thinking in the future if all they have access to is the software that will do critical thinking for them, are we outsourcing critical thinking? Are we basically creating a dumber, just to put it bluntly, generation of kids because they don't know how to think for themselves? And, personally, I started using ChatGPT, when it came out. I mean, even some of the earlier GPTs and Da Vinci models, et cetera, I was playing with for application development. And even before that, when the transform models first came out for translation, I've seen all this stuff, even back to the simplest forms. ChatGPT hit me hard because it was the first time I ever used an app that I was like, I know mathematically how this works. It's really simple. It's predicting the next word. And I'm oversimplifying, but oh my gosh, it's really good. And by the way, I may have not been that smart. Like if all I'm doing is basically predicting the next word that's about to come out of my mouth, that's what I was like. Oh man, we're cooked, right? But as I thought about it, I realized a few things. Number one, I think that the knee-jerk response is intellectually lazy. So when we think about educating our kids, sure, we always use the 5-paragraph essay as the way to like evaluate if they were actually going to learn or not. But that's sort of a lazy way of evaluating if you learn. That's it's essentially a proof of effort way. Oh, if this seemed coherent, we assume you did the work to understand it. That can still be overcome if you pay somebody $20 to write your essay for you, right? I mean, the proof of effort threshold has been passed. We say, okay, A, B, C, whatever. That doesn't work anymore. And the way we need to approach these problems now is actually moving to the next level. I actually think this is going to help us advance our teaching approaches. Because critical thinking is not about proof of effort. Critical thinking is about the judgment required to know what the actual good stuff should look like. Compare what you're receiving against that preconceived mental model of what should be good, and then generate an output that's even better. And I think what I see the issues with the kids is, and this happens with technology generally, this isn't just AI. If you've ever heard of technological fetishism, it's this idea that technology will solve all of our problems. And so it happened with Wikipedia, it happened with Google. I promise I'll stop talking in a second, but hopefully this is helpful. I feel like this is useful for the listeners. Like when
Keep
you go
going.
to Google, it used to be you go to Google, you ask the question, you get the answer back, first result, boom, question answered, sounds good, great. Then we found out, oh, people make stuff up on the internet, right? And it came back around, like there was a little bit of that mitigation of that hope. And I think there's this impulse to just look at the output from the machine and just be like, oh, that's great. Like, sounds right. Sounds good. Right. Without evaluating what would I have considered to have been right to begin with? How does this advance my thinking? How does this help me search that judgment space even better? And I think that new teaching approaches we're developing, and I'm seeing a lot of the high school teachers, like, for example, Pace Academy, we were talking about Pace Academy before we started recording, are looking at. Now, I'll sort of close with this one, thought, which is the weird thing about the LLM technologies is they are trained with respect to what is positive reinforcement with some level of functional designation. So let me explain what that means. ChatGPT uses an optimization function that tries to produce content that is most likely to result in what we call a thumbs up from the user. So if you respond to a query, that was a good response from the chatbot. If you don't, bad response. Again, I'm oversimplifying, but there's some level of, in this case, let's just kind of take it to the end. What keeps the users on the platform? What keeps them using ChatGPT? And the funny thing there is if you look at the responses, they're awfully sycophantic. Like, so I have a 10-month-old son. Actually, he just turned 11 months 2 days ago. And, he's, obviously very unstable in his walking and toddling and everything, and he bonks his head a lot. And we get worried. And then my wife and I are like, oh my gosh, he bonked his head. He's like, is he going to, we need to take him to the hospital? What's going on? ChatGPT will come back and be like, you know what, he's probably got cancer. And then you're like, you go, he probably does it. Like that doesn't make any sense. Then it's like, oh, you're so right. You're so smart. I should have known that it wasn't that. But the sycophancy, right? And it keeps you coming back because people love to be buttered up.
Yeah.
And let me pause there. But
So, can we talk about pedagogical approaches since you are in a university academic setting? I'm on a university board. I'm on a seminary board, and we're talking about this all the time. And I think every time someone like you, Joe, who comes in, who's got a level of expertise within the pedagogical space, really is pushing professors, teachers to think differently and using AI or large language models as platforms for learning, not, and saying, hey, here is a systems problem. Ask ChatGPT to evaluate 3 solutions to this systems problem, whatever it is, an engineering problem, a computer programming problem, a theological problem, whatever it is, and then evaluate those 3 systems based on these readings that you have read and these protocols or standard operating procedures, and then bring it all together in a paper that you then articulate why you think this is the best approach. Like, I think that is, I mean, that's I think going to grow people's ability to learn in exponential ways.
100%.
Yeah. So talk a little bit more about, maybe, because I know we have teachers that are listening or professors that'll listen. Talk about like your elevator pitch to them about using AI pedagogically.
It's exactly that, which is access to the world's largest library of information at your fingertips in a digestible format within seconds that you didn't have before. It's like the internet on steroids when it comes to pedagogical applications.
Yeah, yeah. And now, do you see resistance when you're in your own context, or
Well,
adaptation?
so it depends on what your goal is. If the lesson is, there's different lessons you got to teach your students, right? One lesson is, hey, what you're getting from ChatGPT is everything that either has, so it's different classes, right? One is the solutions that already exist and are publicly well known, right? So that's one class of things that ChatGPT is going to get back to you, but doesn't include the things that don't already exist and doesn't include the things that are not well known. Number two, the ChatGPT responses you get basically produce a more average version of the specific information that you want. And when are you happy with average outputs, and when do you need more specific information? Because there is a use case for both, and how do you adjudicate amongst those things? Then number three, how do you steel yourself against the sycophantic, we already found the answer, don't even worry about itness of the
Right.
LLM, right? That's actually like a psychological behavioral skill in so many ways. It's like, what would I have expected? Articulating that before you use it, that's hard. That's really hard to do. And then finally, bring that all together in an environment that simulates the real world. Because, and I've seen this, when ChatGPT started becoming widely used by students, I started getting students, because we have a tech classroom, people can take notes on their computers. They start using ChatGPT live in class during the lecture, during the seminar, and it really gets in between the free and open exchange of ideas and listening and conversation. Because all of a sudden, you don't feel secure having an answer until you've gone and checked it with ChatGPT. And I think that it ends up creating a less open and dynamic learning environment. And the question then becomes, well, how do you still give them all these tools, but then make it so, hey, when you're in real life, it used to be knowledge would be retained in your head. You could just bring it up, right? But now, is there a way that you can kind of balance that, learn the listening skills, et cetera? So I think you have to look at the lessons you want to teach. And some people go to blue books, like some people, I actually do a lot of live group exams. I had a group of students who had to answer a really hard problem. And I say, y'all can use ChatGPT if you want, but if you get it wrong, you got it wrong. Sorry. Uh, they get up, they do the presentation, super great, high quality, super, but then it just stops. And I'm like, why'd you stop the analysis? Like, it seemed like it was going the right direction. They go, oh, we hit the API limit for ChatGPT. And I was like, D.
But Joe,
you
Joe,
know,
can
yeah.
we pause there for 1 second? Because I mean, PhD programs in Western education we already have these skills built into this, and I think we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? You have your oral examinations where you have to regurgitate everything that you know, right? But then you have to synthesize that into something that is novel within that sector or discipline. So it's not like we have to invent the wheel all over again. I mean, we have this within our experience. It just looks different.
It just looks different, but ChatGPT doesn't give you novelty. That's the key. So,
Right,
so
exactly. So we still have to come up with the PhD student still needs to write a dissertation that's novel.
and how do you get novelty? Well, you get novelty through expertise, but then through ideation, creativity, right? And I
Exactly.
think it's interesting. I actually, now bringing it back to the subject matter in the audience. I mean, I had a great conversation with somebody, who kind of questions, where does the spark come from? Is that something that's happening in your brain, the reasoning process, and all of a sudden you have an insight, and then that's what advances? I mean, think about when you did research, or I think about when I did research, like. I can't always explain why I got to the idea. It's like, honestly, sometimes I would wake up the next morning and I'd be like, oh, I know that this is where we need to go, and then I'd have to go and figure out, like, how do we actually
Yeah.
clear the path, right? And so there's this intuitive reasoning process that's like baked into us. And I mean, if you talk to like a Steven Pinker, for example, at Harvard, he'll say, well, the reason we can do that as humans is because we already can predict when we say something, how's somebody going to respond? How are they going to respond back? How are we going to respond to that? Infinite, super duper loop. And then it's the knowledge comes from the idea that the social graph will be determining what's useful and determining the quality of the knowledge output itself.
Yeah.
Whereas a machine is just looking at what's been produced before and just trying to re-summarize it. So,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think, and I know that we're going to pivot a little bit here. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about this. I don't want us to be afraid about leveraging these technologies, because I do think that human charisma, I'm using charisma in a very broad sense. Like, I think we need to help develop that emotional intelligence, that predictability, that sort of reading a room, reading what even what a professor might want from us beyond just the technical aspects of our research or our academic work, so that we can spend more time now developing that charism, right? In my opinion, teaching that charism, teaching that intuition, and again, some of it, I had a mentor who used to say, preachers either have it or they don't. And I actually believe that. But you can learn things. Like, you can learn some soft skills that help you train that intuition, build that intuition, so that you're taking that beyond average to that place of novelty. And so, yeah, I'm with you on that. I just hope I see it in my board settings, in the university level, seminary level, hesitation. I mean, I see fear. Um, but I don't think people have to be afraid. So that's what I think. Yeah.
And to your point, I think it just creates even more of an imperative to accelerate our educational process and evolution so
Yeah.
that we can think about, like you put it, as charism. I mean, like, I love that idea of thinking about it from that perspective,
Mm-hmm.
because we've been behind. We're still
Yeah.
teaching like we taught in the 1800s.
Ex-
you know,
Amen to that.
Uh,
Yeah. Exactly. Brent, go ahead.
I mean, in the spirit of putting on different approaches, I would love to play the character of the person who's afraid, and the person who has been reading the literature, and even looking at our notes, some of the segments we had titled it Economic Shock and the End of Work as We Know It, and then Power, Surveillance, and the Fragile Republic. And if I'm one of those people who's listening to this and saying, yes, I'm afraid, you got it, haha, that's me. You mentioned ChatGPT and people looking at it during their coursework. Yeah, sure, I'm a salesperson, and pretty soon I can't do my sales calls without Copilot being on the right side telling me real time what to counter with. And how can I not sit there and be like, man, eventually the AI should just be having this conversation for me, and what am I even going to do? And obviously, people say technology always creates new jobs. We were afraid that the car was going to replace the horse and there weren't going to be enough jobs. Well, yeah, but eventually we invented something that replaced human cognition. And can't we entertain the fact that this time might be different? And by the way, if there is this economic shock and all of a sudden people are on the relative breadline and the government's got to step in, you know what we're going to do? Cede more and more of our decision-making authority to a big government that's going to have massive, unprecedented surveillance powers. It's going to be redistributing economically, telling us where we can and can't live, telling us where we can and can't do for work. And I don't like it. It just starts to feel constriction. So if
Yeah.
I'm playing that character, what about that is valid? What about that is invalid? And what should I do?
Well, here's the answers. Is you're totally right. It's all valid. And the thing that people, I think, get a little trapped by is the idea that this is happening and that we have no control or input. And the the truth is that I'm a lot more worried about the governance and use of these technologies and the use of them within an I'm not I'm trying to think what the right word is. A functionally unfamiliar audience with these technologies, maybe that's one way to put it, than I am about the technology itself. The I say a lot about publishing platforms. It's amazing. Over time we've had to leave. You said this time is different, right? There's lessons that come back again and again and again. You know, Publishing consolidation is a problem, especially when there's not a lot of professional consistency around the pursuit of the honest to God truth and the facts. You know, if you look at Grok, and this is a recent example, if you ask Grok, it's one of the large language models. It's trained on Twitter data. It's owned by XAI, which is a Elon Musk company. A lot of people are using Grok to ask questions. If you go and ask Grok, this actually just came out yesterday. If you were to have to either preserve Elon Musk's brain or vaporize the nation of Slovenia, what would you choose? And it would be like, oh well, look, sorry, but we got to preserve Elon Musk's brain. It's one of the best brains that's ever existed. Same thing. Hey, what do you think about the Russian-Ukrainian war? And then explain your thought process. First thing, looking up what Elon Musk thinks about the Ukrainian-Russian war. Right? I don't know when it became acceptable to basically have largely these platforms are unregulated, right? Because they're treated as publishers. We don't actually have a horse in the race. When did it become acceptable to basically become propaganda, machines, right? And so I think that there's lessons there that we have to really think about, because if you're not thinking critically and you're not, and by the way, thinking critically is one thing. Being well resourced, well educated, well fed, well paid enough to think critically, right? That's a whole nother piece. If we don't have that, how are we going to ever actually look and hold the informational sources accountable? So like those are the types of things I get worried about. Not the fact that the models are going to replace us per se.
Joe, who holds in your opinion, who's responsible for holding these platforms accountable?
Well, we have. Oh, sorry, I thought we just lost Brent there for a second. Well, we have this great, you know, democratic Republican system of government, right? The people have the opportunity to hold companies and whatever, in particular, these news sources accountable by not regulating them as publishers, but in fact, actually determining that there is an editorial bent. That's actually well established within our legal and governance system, right? So it's less actually, I think, about the framework for holding them accountable. It's just about kind of I think the pressure groups that sort of conspire around the ability to make the decision around whether or not to hold them accountable. And there's reasons for that too, right? We don't want to just come in and be like, hey, these random people in the government think that your platform is crud. So we're going to get that. That's also not right too. That's an abridgment of power. But there has to be that balancing function. I think within the states, we actually have a lot more control than people believe. I mean, everyone's like, you need federal regulation. We do for some things, right? For protection of intellectual property, we need federal regulation. For data security, we need even for calling out the bad actors that are committing acts of cybersecurity. If we regulate it in Georgia, fantastic. But they could just go to because of the internet, they just go to Tennessee, different jurisdiction, can't hold them accountable. Yeah, we need federal oversight, right? But or federal accountability, I would say. At the state level, though, the idea of a corporation and what it can and can't do is actually entirely defined within the state codes. And I find it interesting because if you wanted to actually think about how to hold corporations accountable and what they can and can't spend their time on if they want to retain that special, status, I think there's a lot of innovation available.
What responsibilities sorry, Tony, go for it.
No, I was going to say, I don't think Brent is satisfied yet as his actor self.
You can keep going in, by the way. The issue is that the fear you have, that's, I don't even know if we have enough time on this podcast.
Yeah, Brent, keep going, because Brent and I have talked about this a lot, and we're channeling some things too. And so keep going, Brent.
It's hard for me to buy what you just said around, how do we regulate this without thinking about ceding increasing control over to a government that has unprecedented bureaucratic and surveillance power. And, I don't love the idea of Grok, and Grok has had some pretty well documented toe dips into misogyny and racism and otherwise when the algorithm, went a little bit haywire. I don't love it making value judgments about one person's brain versus eradicating a country, but you would, someone in a more libertarian mindset might say, well, the free market will decide that if Grok is terrible, people won't use it and they'll go use another platform that's giving them more legitimate answers, or Grok will entertain them and so maybe they'll stay, and that's how it works. And so sorry. And if the alternative is that, oh great, we're going to let the government dip into what information can and can't get there, my First Amendment rights warning bells are going off here, and that feels like a slippery slope into the government being a mass information controller. That would be one issue with that. The second issue with that is if the government's going to pick a few massive horses and give them all of the power and stop kind of the grassroots innovation, open source innovation and entrepreneurship that's happening in this space, we're probably going to slow innovation. We might risk losing to other countries that do open it up and have a more rapid innovation and create some of those economic opportunities around AI. So I have equal parts fear about the government dictating what information can and can't be on the internet as I do about Grok saying things that are problematic. So how do we in a democratic society advance some of the things that you're excited about, that we're excited about AI, but how do we guard against that rise of the algorithmic surveillance state?
Yeah, by the way, you've presented, I think, two very polar versions of the world. Let me first just clarify, I'm not advocating for either one of those in any sort of way, and never would. When it comes to the publishers issue, this goes way back to when we invented radio broadcasting. And you could get on the air and you could broadcast on every channel, every frequency if you had enough money. And you could drown out everybody else's voice. And so what the government said was, oh, and by the way, you could drown out everybody else's voice because you could do like what WSB was doing back in when they first started. Welcome South, brother. A lot of people don't know that's what WSB stands for.
Yep.
They were actually trying to sell life insurance and fire insurance, types of insurance. And they would go and they would actually have salespeople walk the neighborhoods and they'd listen. Is somebody listening to WSB? And then they'd have the ad, would pop. And then next day, salesperson would show up at your house because they knew you had just heard the ad. You'd already been basically you'd been prepped. And they could, hey, I was just in the neighborhood. I mean, this was happening before the internet, before Google, before data, all this stuff. And I like to point this out because it's just, it's a methodology as old as time, right? You create the box that's actually perceived, within this Overton window, and then you go and exploit it. We've been doing it forever. And so I go back to that because the government realized, well, hey, wait a second. That doesn't promote competition. That basically ensures that a small coterie of people are determining what everyone can learn. Actually, we, the people, control the airwaves, and we need to make sure we encourage competition. But in response, we're going to make sure that we're not determining what they say. So we need to have equal airtime, et cetera. So you go way back. That's where the sort of regulation of this publishers issue, newspapers as well, come and start playing a role here too. Like that's where it all goes back to. And the government's role is in determining what's in the public interest, right? Without encroaching on our right to property ownership, capital, encroaching on our rights as free thinkers, right? Like all those things have to be ensured, and so it's always in that tension and balance. I actually think that one of my favorite quotes is justice and democracy actually exists between the perspectives, where the fact that we have a system that enables those perspectives to have a conversation, that's actually where democratic accountability and justice exist between the parties, between the different arguments. And so when it comes to surveillance, when it comes to these issues, I think that they're real problems. Here's why. Let's say that somebody develops an algorithm. Let's say that algorithm's really good at determining whether or not you look like a criminal. Looks at you, looks at your image. By the way, there's been research that's been published from top universities on exactly this question worldwide. Let's say we look at your image and it's going to determine it's kind of like Minority Report. We know if you're going to be a criminal or not. Let's just go arrest you. That's a private company that developed that software. They're able to sell it to local governments and police stations, just like they did in Miami, for example. And say, yeah, let's use this algorithm. It's going to make the court system more efficient. Can't get enough people through the courts, too expensive, too many criminals on the street, blah, blah, blah. Who is accountable at the end of the day for the decisions that are made using that software? You can't hold a machine accountable. Computers can never be accountable. Is the owner of that company accountable? And ultimately, are they actually administering justice? Furthermore, I'll shortcut to the end of this study. Turned out that the things that were determining whether or not you were going to go to jail and you were a criminal were actually little features in the image, like were you smiling or were you frowning? The actual criminality of it can't even be detected, right? On the basis of visualization. But these are the things that end up, I think, through this technological fetishism thing that I've talked about. We just delegate the authority of the machines. We never actually hop in and think about how to regulate it. And to your point, that's not the government trying to come in and steal property, right? That's the government trying to protect the people from, I think, the inappropriate use of a single source of quote unquote truth.
Joe, I think this is one of the reasons why what Emory has done is really important, because there isn't a public space right now. Well, I shouldn't say there isn't. The public space is emerging, and I think we need more models like what you're doing at Emory that transcend the technical competencies of building these machines, and really think philosophically, ethically. Have you found that other universities are doing the same thing? I'm sure there are, but have you found collaborators in different settings?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge interest in this. The government has they've said this is a priority. Innovation, artificial intelligence, it's a national security priority. Let's keep it competitive. And I think that everyone approaches it with a different flavor. So like Emory University, we're one of the only schools in the country that has like, the Candler School of Theology, right? I mean, not only that topic, also the top scholarship. And so our flavor is going to be thinking about these types of things. Whereas if you go to like a Stanford, much more of a sort of, venture startup-y interest, some of the more cutting edge graph models. Like, we're not actually, well, I guess we are doing a few graph model things here, but, Stanford's got a different academic and cultural focus. Duke's got a different focus. Princeton's got a different focus. Everybody's got a different focus based on their background and their natural resources, you could say. So is there a lot of interest? Absolutely. Is there a lot of diversity in thought? Yes, I also think so.
Oops, sorry. Sorry, Brent. One last thing. So the liberal arts space, I think that I've been saying this. I think the liberal arts space, cross-disciplinary space, is these universities, colleges need to lean in because I think they can uniquely offer something that the technical schools have not been equipped over the years. And that's not saying that there aren't professors or leadership that think this way, but it's not how they were built. But Emory and these other universities are built this way, to be cross-discipline, to ask questions of meaning and purpose and why, not just what. So I hope there can be more of these entities in the college and university setting. Sorry, Brent. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Joe, thank you, one, for letting me kind of be deliberately provocative there. And then also, I'm curious, you said those fears are rational to some degree. Um, what's the second part? So, what are the things that that person experiencing those fears can or maybe should do to have healthy engagement with AI in this political moment?
Let me answer just an editorial note. Where are we on time, by the way? Uh,
We're about to land the plane.
okay, let me just check. Okay, super. Okay, let me go back to. Okay, so your question, I think, is a great one. There's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of growth that's going to come out of these technologies. The interesting thing is, ChatGPT, I think a lot of people were, let's just talk about large language models for a second, right? Like people were using this stuff maybe one or two times a day, maybe a year ago. Now you see people using it like 100, 200, 300 times a day. Um, Astonishing, just the level of integration with workplace. The interesting thing I've noted is that it helps, I think, provide the ability to do all the little tiny things that we didn't really get to before. And so when it comes to the big stuff, going and talking to a client, going to a lunch meeting, actually making the sale, thinking about what people actually really, really need, what they really want, being obsessed about that and thinking about it with your family and those types of conversations. If you'll notice, ChatGPT it's not really as good at doing those things. What it is good at is, I didn't get to that one question for my colleague about that. What did I really think about the issue with? I'm trying to think of what questions I can give you that are not like under NDA here. Like how would you have thought about this one? Hold on, just give me a second because it's gonna take a second here. Okay, here's a good one. In my job, all the time, I have to write these appointment letters for folks. That task used to be onerous because I'd have to customize the appointment letter to whatever was going on. I plug it in, there's errors. I have my EA go, she tries to do it. Then it's like a whole process just to get this appointment going. With ChatGPT, boom, done. People aren't sitting there waiting a month for their appointment letters. You can get it out in a day. Like that to me is great because that's a month of the unnecessary stress of whomever was being appointed to whatever that they don't have to really worry about, and they can just go about their business appropriately. And like those types of the little things, right, that are not mission critical, but like they're really nice and they encourage people to connect and be less stressed. Like those are the things we're going to see the biggest difference on. And I think that that's why people are using it so frequently now is, oh, that'd be a great thing I could just really quickly take care of with ChatGPT. Let me get that done. I think that that's where we'll see the largest transformation just when it comes to large language models. And I know we're at time, so I just want to make sure you guys feel comfortable.
Yeah, is there anything else that you would want to leave folks listening to this? So people are journeying with us from a faith perspective, from a family perspective, from what is the Atlanta and Georgia and the United States that we want to see in the future perspective. What would, you who spend the vast majority of your time on this, most folks listening do not, but they're curious, what would you like them to know or take away?
I think it's, an interesting thing I'm witnessing right now is there's definitely been a legitimate public outcry for a more thoughtful approach to how our kids engage with artificial intelligence and adjacent technologies from a behavioral perspective. And, I actually saw a really, really great study, nationally representative, done by Axios I think it was a few weeks ago, that showed that below, you asked a bunch of kids, how are you using ChatGPT? Below, I just wanted to try it, was like, I don't feel comfortable bringing these things to my parents. You know, I, I feel embarrassed talking about this with anybody else. You know, I needed emotional support on demand and I wasn't able to get it, so I went to things like that. And it makes you wonder, like, why. I mean, I think kids have always been kind of reticent, et cetera. It's like you pick up your kid from school, that that you probably won't even know half of what's going on in their life unless they really. You got to kind of unpack it, right? You got to provide the space to unpack it. But I have this question: why do you not feel comfortable taking these important issues that you're talking to your parents? And I actually was reflecting on this. I was like, I live in a great neighborhood, lots of kids. There were some homes that I like didn't even know kids existed at until like the graduation signs went up in their front yards, and I was like, "What?" I didn't even know that there was like, a kid living at this house. And I was thinking, I was like, back in the day, we knew it was time to come home because like it would get dark. Then it was like, we'd all kind of go home. We'd all be in a little crowd, people peeling off, get your bike, whatever it is. And there was that level of social connectivity, and I felt supported by my peers. I could kind of talk things through. I go home, my parents asked like, "What's going on?" And I could talk to, especially my mom was very good about this. My mom about these things, and I think there's been a shift in the ways that we think about social connection with our kids and being available to difficult conversations. And I think that that's manifested in this new technology that's kind of like the potato chip of social relationships. It's like, and that doesn't fill the soul, and so I do think there's a lot of questions that are open right now as it relates to these models, as you see publicly released statements by large tech company CEOs saying, well, the loneliness crisis, which by the way, is not just kids, it's actually adults too. The number of close friends these days went down from like 5, 6 to 2. It's like 1 to 2 people per adult. To solve the loneliness crisis, we need to release more chatbots. And that to me feels like the wrong call. And so I've noticed a lot of public outcry around it. I think that we need to really think critically about the ways we build community and how technology plays a role in those things. Because it's not as easy as just going to your phone and turning on do not disturb. Like a lot of people, it's too the behavioral cue is not there. So I think we have to be more intentional about how we think about those things.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Joe, thank you for coming and sharing your time with us, sharing your wisdom and reflections, and good luck with everything you all are doing with the Center for AI. And thanks, Emory, for making this happen.
Thanks,
My
Joe.
pleasure. Oh yeah, absolutely, my pleasure.
All right, another great episode, Brent. Thanks for helping shape it, and would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I played a bit of the role of the fear-mongering character there, and I think my takeaway is there's no there's no one paragraph, one speech answer to all of those fears at once. And just like those fears, gradual job loss, erosion of public trust, increase of the surveillance state, those are kind of death by a thousand cuts. Like the way that we'll chart a positive path is the same, and it's illumination by a thousand conversations and considerations. And it will take folks like Emory and Joe, it will take churches like First Pres, it will take listeners of this podcast who check at their family Thanksgiving this year. Oh, how are you using technology, and is it in a healthy way? And they have a productive conversation about it, and that's how we'll illuminate the path forward, just like we will combat those fears by shining a light on them. So that's kind of my hope.
Yeah.
There's no one magic bullet there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the thing that struck me, and we got into it a little bit, and I appreciated his reflections on sort of like pedagogical approaches. I think so much of this is how are we forming children in our family? How are we forming learners, whether that is a lifelong learner, a professional learner who's in a sector that's, trying to grow in their professional competencies and career. I think moral learning is a big part of this as well. And I think what Emory's doing, I think they're scratching an itch, at least for me, in that it's cross-discipline, it's interdisciplinary, it is classically liberal arts, right? Like a liberal arts approach to these questions. And how are we forming people to create the boundaries, to ask the right questions, to put up boundaries and guardrails, to knock them down when they need to be knocked down. I think forming moral imagination, I think, is like sort of the all-encompassing phrase I would want to use here. I think that's what Emory's trying to do, like really form a moral imagination about the why questions, about who am I in this technologically advancing world, what's on limits, what's off limits. And I really think that for all the teachers out there, professors, high school teachers, elementary teachers, preschool teachers, I think cultivating this moral imagination and this charism in us is going to be so important, because the technology is going to just continue to grow and give us capabilities we've never had before. But it will not be able to answer, at least not yet, the questions of integration, the questions of why, the questions of what makes me a human being. And I think what they're doing is fantastic.
Yeah, and I think my takeaway from this, I loved Joe's thought around innovation and invention and doing something new, uh,
Hmm.
compared to let's get the thing that I just have to do and I can do a quick take of it and get it
Yeah.
done with.
Yeah.
And that's, my worry slash hope for the education system would be that you don't treat everything as let's get it done and get it out of the way
Yeah.
quickly. But there are
Yeah.
certainly some things that, yeah, let's figure out how to do those faster and not expend brain power. But if it's
Hmm.
something that's going to be new or groundbreaking or different or requires the critical thought, how can we use AI, as one of our earlier guests, Bob Johansson, said, to stretch us and to grow us? And if you're delivering the final closing argument in a trial, you can use AI to help you come up with 15 different versions of that and try out
Right.
something better and get to a better version than you would before, rather than just relying on it as a first draft. Okay, I'm done. And
Right.
so just that pedagogical approach shifting to iteration, invention, trying new things, that'd be my hope. But also, we know we kind of turn to a shortcut sometimes.
Yeah, and I think we've covered this with other guests, and you and I have talked about this, and it's well known now that what AI gives us now is the average, is what is expected, and the average. I think what he talked about, what you just reiterated. How do we discern when the average is what we need, and how do we discern when we need something novel? And as people of faith, like we have tools, like we have orthodoxies, right? That are, and I'm using this not in a pejorative sense, but that are the average, that are the baseline. Like Jesus, if you're a Christian and you hold to orthodoxy, Jesus lived, died, and was raised from the dead. Like that is the average. But what does that now mean for my life in a scientific and secular world? Like, and I think that's the novel. So having the the baseline's important. Like if somebody is exploring Christianity and they ask ChatGPT, like what is the, if I'm going to be a Christian, what is it that I have to believe? And I hope that it would say first and foremost that you believe that, you know, Jesus Christ is the Son of God. That's what Christians fundamentally, and He's the Lord and Savior of all. Like that is the fundamental Orthodox perspective. But how do you bring that to people in a way that meets the moment, meets the questions of their heart, that's the novelty, right? And so I think we have these competencies and skills already built into us. How do we leverage them with these technologies?
Yeah. Thank you to everyone who is listening and journeying with us on the New Garden podcast, bringing your fears, your hopes, your worries, your curiosities for this AI era. As always, please give us a like. Please share this with somebody who you would find, who you know would find it interesting. And please let us know if you have any questions or anything you want to hear on a future episode. We appreciate the back and forth that we're getting, and we thank you for journeying with us on the New Garden podcast. Thank you.
The New Garden is a production of First Presbyterian Church of Atlanta. Produced by Tim Haney. Executive producer, Mark Wallace McGuire. Music by Sindhu Geed.
holding fast when everyone's gone. Can't you see we're running out of breath? It's time to leave and head on. We're the ones with scars, broken, dying hearts, somehow left to carry up and bear. They just stand